If we're looking at health indices around where you really want to invest, let's invest in more of that. If every Māori child in New Zealand was fully expressing their Māoriness, then you would have very little need for specialists like me. And that would be a great legacy.
From a television celebrity to a forensic psychiatrist, Dr Hinemoa Elder has made a fascinating transformation. Her story is one of unrelenting determination to care for the most important and vulnerable things in our mind: our people, our well-being, and our land. This is Dr Hinemoa Elder, Indigenous 100. Te Māori kura, Hinemoa, tēnā koe. No mai ki te rao take, no mai ki tā tātou pāpāhotanga. It's awesome to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on our program on Indigenous 100. Where to begin? You are one of very few New Zealand child and adolescent psychiatrists. What do child and adolescent psychiatrists do?
Great question. Yes, I am. I'm the only Māori child and adolescent psychiatrist as far as I know right now. And what we do is we do a range of things, because like in any branch of medicine, there are a whole range of subspecialties. So everything from acute work, which means people who are extremely unwell, psychiatrically unwell, and need to be in a hospital setting. So for young children and teenagers who are facing those sort of challenges with their whānau, we do that sort of work, and that's one of the things I do at the Child and Family Unit at the Starship. Another thing I do there is I help look after women and their babies, or pregnant women who are suffering from severe mental illness, who we try to keep together with their babies and their whānau in that unit in the Starship also. So that's another branch of child and adolescent psychiatry. Then in the community, there's a whole range of different kinds of services where specialists like me might see children, teenagers, their whānau facing difficulties with their mood, feeling very sad, feeling suicidal, feeling a lot of anxiety, having problems in their relationship with food and their bodies, different relationships with substances, which unfortunately is a very common problem. And then things like difficulties with concentrating or being very distractible or impulsive in a school setting and other settings, and then people who are facing severe psychotic illnesses but are managing to stay in the community, who don't need to be in hospital. Then there are some other things that some of us do. So I also practice youth forensic psychiatry. This is a branch of child and adolescent psychiatry, arguably, where I write court reports for a range of different courts. So young people are referred to me by the court who have some legal matters, and they also have some concomitant psychological or psychiatric problems. And then I also get involved with the neuropsychiatry of traumatic brain injury. So I did my PhD and my postdoctoral research. Looking at, especially for us as Māori, the differential issues that we face and how we might think differently about the head, nā te mea he tapu te upoko, and how we might bring forward the ancient wisdom into contemporary medical practice. So I don't exclusively see Māori tamariki mokopuna who have brain injuries. I also see people of all different cultures. But that's another branch, if you will, of child and adolescent psychiatry.
But you see applications not just for Māori and Māori tamariki and taiohi, but also for all children, right? The ability of a Māori framework to be able to bring benefits, good health outcomes, good well-being outcomes for all children of Aotearoa, right? Is that the approach?
I do. So I do see that our ways of thinking, our ways of relating, and I do believe that as Māori, one of our superpowers is our relational capacity. We are brilliant at relating to other people and finding deep connections with other people. And so within some of that work, and I've seen how that can be in practice, I've seen how non-Māori whānau really love and derive great value from being provided services by Māori providers. So long story short, I think that our Māori ways of thinking and our Māori practices are leadership models that have potential for value for anybody from Aotearoa.
Why? That blows me away, I'll be honest.
Okay.
And the question that comes to mind is, why do you do this? Because it is not easy. It is, a field of speciality view is traumatic brain injury. So it's not easy, it is traumatic. It must be emotional, it must be heavy for you to do this work, particularly when it's our tamariki mokopuna.
Yeah.
Why do you do it?
I do it because I'm absolutely driven to do it. It's almost like it's not my choice. So I feel a sense of my ancestors, if you will, a sense of energy that flows through me, that I'm meant to be doing this.
Where does that come from? What leads that to occur? What forces you to feel that way?
There's so many different strands that influence me in that way. One key one is my mother, my mother's life, her passing, and she left a lot of clues when she died, the way I think of it. So she, for one thing, wanted to gift her body to the medical school, which was quite an extraordinary thing for us as a whānau to contemplate. And then we honoured her wishes, and so we as a whānau got to know the medical school, and through that, then I went to medical school. So through that experience, I met a lot of our whānau in the starship where the tamariki had experienced a brain injury. And what I saw was this cultural silence, an absence of any cultural grunt around the disturbance, the disharmony around the head because of the head injury, and what cultural resources could be brought forward for that. And I remembered from my childhood, the fact that my mother didn't speak Te Reo was one thing, but she did impart many key cultural values to us, one being the head is sacred. And I remember thinking, why is this not part of general medical knowledge and general psychiatric practice? It's so obvious. This is the key part of our focus in psychiatry, but why don't we think about it from a Māori perspective? Right. And so I felt like, there's a sort of prodding that goes on from our ancestors. You go, yes, you're moving in the right direction now, keep going, keep going. And this kind of energy, when you get a sense of you're in the flow and you're following the right path, there are clues around, right, that tell you, yes, keep going here.
And your mother, because it was your mother's health that led you to start looking at this as a field of endeavour for you, right? In terms of your career. So talk to me about your mum. Where was she from?
She was from Te Heku. So both of her parents are from the north. My grandfather, Tommy Bowman, was from Maunganui, Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Rehia, Te Hekatu. And we have lines down from Turikātuku on that side. Oh. And then on my grandmother's side, very much Te Aupōuri, Ngāti Kurī. So they lived in Herekino, and my mother was born in Kaitaia Hospital.
Geez, you're far north hard. You're hard hard.
Reckon, yeah.
So what happened to your mum? What led to her, health issues, and of course ultimately her passing when you were considering going into medical school? Yeah,
well, she had been an incredibly healthy woman, the only one in her whānau to go to university. She became a teacher. She taught at Ngāti College. In fact, what's wonderful is every now and again I get contact from various people, or I bump into people and say, oh, we remember your mum, which is such a blessing. So as a healthy person, she played a lot of basketball at uni, she played squash, she played netball, and never smoked and drank very little, got breast cancer. And at the age of 54, died. and that's when I was pregnant with my son. So that was really, really tough. And yet, she continues to give me so much guidance.
Why though? Why did you feel, or why was it that you were so compelled to go to medical school? Was it the situation where you talked about the fact that there was so very little Māori thinking, Māori approaches, particularly with relation to your mum, but just generally applied in the hospital? Is that the ultimate thing that pushed you to go that way, or were there other things pulling you at the same time, as well as what was happening with your mum, that led you to follow that path?
There were other things. My younger brother had a serious mental illness, and he subsequently also died. So that was once I was at the medical school, but we had grown up with that, and so I had the whānau experience of that. And the spectre of suicide is something that, you know, we all live with. We all live those stats. Those stats are not theoretical to us. So I also had a deep sense of wanting to make a difference in mental health right from the beginning.
Why then were you in TV and an amazing presenter and doing really well in media and broadcasting? How did that come about? Because it seems to me that seems that your decision to go to med school, to follow the path that you're on now, that you're undertaking now, seems quite natural. And yet here you were, a very well-known, very good broadcaster on television, very popular, and I'm trying to figure out how that happens when it seems quite natural that you should be on the path that you're on now, you know?
Yeah, well, I had been living overseas. I came back home because my mother was so ill, and out of the blue, one of my friends said, "Oh, they're looking for somebody for this TV show. You should audition for that."
3:45 Live.
3:45 Live. And so, yeah, I got the job, and really that hadn't been necessarily part of my plan to be working in television, but I suppose it was children's television, and you know, children and tamariki mokopuna are very much my thing, always have been. So I think that may be part of the synergy. But that was a unique and amazing opportunity, which I loved. I feel incredibly lucky to have had that experience. And many of those people are, you know, friends for life. Yeah,
absolutely. What was it like though, having that public persona? You know, at a time where TV1 was everything. TV was the big pull, you know. I remember 6 o'clock news used to get like 800,000 to a million people watching it at that time. You would have it, probably 500,000 people watching it at 3:45 Live. One of them being me, by the way. You know, what was that like for you? Because it sounds like it wasn't a natural fit for you to be doing that role, and yet here you were, posters all over Auckland, well known across the country. What was that like, dealing with that public?
I think back then life was simpler. You know, we didn't have social media, we didn't have quite so much pressure. It felt very relaxed, to be honest.
Wow.
I was perhaps a little bit naive. I do remember going to a dinner with the person I was dating, who I later married and had a child with, and just saying to one of my friends, "Oh, you know, I'm here at this dinner with this person," and I had no idea about the fame of that person, of Paul at that time. It kind of dawned on me eventually, obviously. I was a bit slow. I think it was a different era.
I find that fascinating, you know, given that he was who he was, and was as ubiquitous as he was, you know, not just in Auckland but across the country, and you obviously well known as well, and it was almost like a collision of stars, you know, this kind of supernova event when that kind of occurred at the time. I find it fascinating you didn't get a sense of that as you were going through it.
I suppose it was natural and normal for us and our whānau and our extended whānau. Paul, you know, is very rooted in his background and his whānau in the Hawke's Bay. And so they kept him, you know, they kept him honest, and they would give him his mother would give him a serious talking to if she thought he was offline. Whether he listened or not, that's another thing, of course. But I think we're both very grounded people, and so that's the way I remember it.
What did you learn from that broadcasting background that you've kind of carried with you? You know, for example, you're an extremely good communicator, both in Māori and in English. By the way.
Ngā mihi nui.
You know, I've seen kind of recordings of you doing presentations, which are just amazing. I find them informative, but also you've got a way that you know, you're quite gregarious in terms of the way you communicate. That kind of enthralls people to want to listen and to be a part of what you're talking about. What else have you learned from that kind of broadcasting background that you've stayed with you and have carried on with you throughout this kind of journey?
A lot of things.
Like?
I think I was very lucky in that, you know, Paul was a great communicator, and to just breathe the same air and see how he was doing that and how he tuned into his natural style, which, you know, for some people was a little polarizing. And I think his style evolved also, and his political views evolved over time too. I suppose the key learnings around communication for me were relate. Think about the relationship and what you want to convey, but relate first and also listen to people. So we have a lot more language around this now. We talk about, you know, listening without thinking about what you want to say next. Actually just be in that listening energy, in that listening moment. And he, I think, was very good at that, because he was prepared to be flexible. You know, he wasn't one of those interviewers who stuck with questions and then doggedly went through those questions. He was creative in allowing that creative listening to then stimulate a different line of questioning, which I think provided a more revealing kind of experience for the viewer. So for me, in my job, I'm a natural listener, which is why I was joking with you before about saying, hey, can I interview you? That would be much easier. And maybe people would like to see that.
No, not at all.
So in my job, I listen. And I listen not only with my Māori ears and my Māori heart and my Māori puku. I listen with my wairua.
Explain to me what that means. What do you mean by that?
It's hard to explain, actually.
Because I don't think that's a broadcasting technique. We don't get, as you know, we don't get taught that.
No, but I suppose that's my take on the best broadcasters, on the best communicators, are actually listening and being in that moment with other people at another level. So we could call it an intuitive level, people who really tune in, people who use the whole of the instrument of their being as the foil, or as something that's dynamic around what's happening in that moment between those people. So as a psychiatrist, one of the things I've learned is that I need to be able to morph myself into the best psychiatrist that I can be for those people in that moment. I can't be the same psychiatrist for all the whānau that I see.
I see, yep.
I need to be able to tune my instrument to the needs of the whānau in front of me. And I have some ways to prepare myself to do that.
What are those?
So I read everything I can beforehand. I prepare. I'm all about preparation.
Right.
And then just to kind of take a bit of a tangent, it reminds me of another thing. I trained as a dancer. So from a very young age, ballet, you know, little 5-year-old, going to the bar, doing the pliés, doing the tondus, doing all of that. And when you dance, that's what you go back to. No matter whether you've been doing it 20 years, 30 years, you go back to the basics. And that's what I do in my job as a psychiatrist. I go back to the basics. Read the material. Think about the material. Think about the kinds of questions. If there are other Māori resources that help to triage, that help to formulate the material before you go in, do that. And then in the room, it's a bit like letting all of the technique go. Just let it wash over you. And so in the first few minutes, I'm really, even first few seconds actually, I'm just honing in on what's going on with the people and trusting my ancestors there with me. They're giving me extra additional intel. They're giving me ancient tech, I call it, right? You know, they didn't have virtual reality or augmented reality or AI back in the day, but they had their own versions of that. So I tune into that in the room. And then I have some drop-down menus, if you like, of things that I'm interested in pursuing, but really I want to go with the flow of what people are offering.
Okay. I understand that. I think I've got it now. What I am grappling with is how are you able to still do that when dealing with the very serious, traumatic events that have led to that family being in the room. Yeah. And you said you let things wash over you.
Yes.
And again, this is not a technique that is taught. You've got to have a kind of an innate sense of it to be able to deal with it. So how do you enable yourself to be washed over by those kind of things without being really broken by it? Do you know what I mean? It's not a very good way of putting it, but how do you do that?
There's a number of different things. So part of that is about preparing and looking after myself. Right. Because I can't go into those sort of sessions, as you quite rightly say, with people who are facing extremely complex, challenging issues, intergenerational trauma, ancient trauma, which is very palpable, very tangible in the room, without feeling clean in myself, without feeling resilient in myself, without feeling full of resource. So I have to look after myself. So that's why I do things like wakaama and I go to the gym. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, okay.
So prep. Yeah. Again, physical, wairua, spiritual prep, mind prep. And then in the room, I suppose I'm trusting that I'm there for a purpose. So part of my purpose is about coming alongside that whānau and discovering how we can do something different. Like, what is the nature of the problem? They may have an idea and I might have some different ideas. So part of my function is to co-design a way that we can explain what is going on. And then when we have a good idea together of what is going on, then we can decide, well, what do we do about that? So as much as the material, the content is washing over me, and I will experience that, I do experience that as very heavy sometimes, there's also a part of me that's thinking about the purpose. So I can feel it and I can be focused on what are we going to do about this.
Right. I think this is really important because, as you know, this is going to an Indigenous audience. Yeah. This will relate a lot to that Indigenous audience. You talk about intergenerational trauma and the effects of that. Shared experience for a lot of Indigenous communities. Part of me wonders how much of this is actually you and your innate skills developed through generations, through your mum and you and your experiences, and how much of it can be taught to others, which is a really important part about what you're trying to do as well, particularly at Auckland. So how much of this do you think is able to be taught, inculcated, ingrained, developed for others so that we can help all other Indigenous communities? And can it be done?
My practice-based evidence tells me it can be done, that you can teach people, particularly Indigenous people, to tune into the ancient resources of our ancestors that are available to us actually at any moment. So one of the things I say about people who are living to, let's say, young people who are in trouble with the law, I say, you know, there's a whole lot of people out there who know about your existence and they're just waiting for you. You don't know about them maybe, or maybe you have an inkling about them. But there's all this cultural resource, both in the physical world and in the non-physical world. So part of my job is to bring that to the attention, is to bring that forward, whether I'm inviting people into a cultural competency kind of dynamic, or whether I'm working with a whānau in a therapeutic way. It's a similar conversation.
How often do you have an experience where people go, I don't get you, you're on a completely different plane to where I'm at, and I'm not quite there yet? What do you do? Is it, in most experiences you find where people actually latch onto that pretty quickly and go, I've got it, you've got me. Is that what happens most of the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
I can't think of anyone ever saying, I don't get this.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I've been a specialist since 2006.
Yeah.
And before that, it's a 5-year training.
Yeah.
So I might not language it in the way that I'm speaking about it with you right now.
Okay.
I'm trying to distill it in a different way. But this is how I work.
Wow. Because when you went to med school,
Yeah.
and you've talked about the fact that there was a complete cultural deficit of this kind of thinking and approach within the education that you received at the time you were in med school. In actual fact, you went to med school as a result of what people considered at the time to be quite a controversial process.
Indeed.
Of having a quota of Māori who went into the med school. How did you deal with that part particularly? And then as you were going through your training at med school, how did you deal with the fact that there wasn't a hell of a lot of Māori resources being employed in med school at the time?
Well, there's a few things that strike me straight off the bat. There were some very key Māori in the medical school at Auckland when I was there. So tikanga skipper from Tainui, from Tūranga Waiwai, was like our mother hen, and she still is. Mm-hmm. She is the most incredible kuia. I love her dearly. She has guided me from that early stage. And of course we had David Tipene Leach, you know. So we had some pretty big guns in there. And Paparangi has been around for quite a long time. She was in Wellington when I first started med school.
At the Edu Pomare Health
Yes.
Research Centre, yeah.
But now she's very much, you know, tūmoke Māori at the university. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say that there was nothing there.
Right.
There were a lot of good people there. And the structure of the organisation is Pākehā. So having Māori coming into that space and taking care of us was clearly challenging in different ways. Richard Fall, of course, from Taranaki was there right from the beginning, and there were all sorts of shenanigans around. We were wanting to have karakia for the dissection room, for the tūpapaku, and initially, you know, that was not something the med school was really going to support. And it was a little bit under the radar. And eventually the non-Māori students were saying, oh, we want a bit of that too, thank you very much. And then it became the norm, and then everyone was saying, isn't this wonderful that we have karakia, you know. This is how things roll. So at that time, one of the most controversial things was that in the era that I came into med school, for the people who'd come straight from school, their school performance, once they were into the sausage factory of whether they were going to be successful in getting into med school or not, the marks were put to one side. So they all had different activities, problem-solving activities in groups and individually, that then determined their entry into medical school. That was controversial. For us MAPAS students, we had a slightly different entry point. We were on the marae. We were really quizzed about, well, to what extent, you know, are you committed to being a Māori doctor, and what does that mean to you? And I remember Colin Mantell was part of that and was very staunch, quite rightly so. So, you know, yes, it was a particular era, and the things have changed now. It's not the same anymore.
No. But what was it like for you though, going into that environment? Because you're right, you had to give a very clear commitment. I mean, it was the same when my wife went in 2003, 2004, she had to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
You had to give a very clear commitment to Māori health, ongoing commitment to Māori health at the time. So what was that like for you at that time, going through that process? Yeah,
it was pretty nerve-wracking, because I suppose it's that idea of, am I Māori enough? You know, I couldn't speak te reo at that time. My mother had died, And for me, there was a sense of, I had to step up into the next generation after my mother died. I was promoted up, which was more responsibility, and I felt I didn't have the cultural knowledge that I would have liked to have had. And at the same time, absolutely committed, having seen some of the things that my brother was going through and the difficulties in terms of service provision and support. And I could already see gaps. We're a Māori family. We are, like many Māori families, we don't have the language. We don't get up home that often. At that time, I wasn't able to go up to the far north very much. And because our mother had passed, that clear link was missing. So we had to re-establish a lot of those links. So I went into that wānanga day really unsure. I was very clear in my commitment, but I wasn't sure if that would be enough.
So how did you get assurance? How did you get that comfort built up within you to be able to keep going? What did you lean on? What did you do to give yourself that real true sense of self to say, I'm here, I should be here, I can help, I am committed, despite the fact that you may have had a perceived sense of lack of knowledge and cultural competency, capability, whatever it might be?
I suppose I just came with, this is the best I've got, and I'm going to do my best. Everything that I committed to in my life, I was doing my very best at. That's the kind of person I am. So that must have got me through on the day.
Yeah. How important though did it become, or how aware were you that at some point you needed to undertake a journey, or that you wanted to undertake a journey? Where did that become obvious?
That became very obvious in the latter part of the training at medical school. So in the last couple of years when we were doing clinical placements, it became so clear to me.
How did it become so clear?
I saw Māori whānau in the hospital in different clinical settings, and looking into their eyes and them looking into my eyes, there was a need. We would be much happier speaking in te reo Māori.
This is what they were saying to you?
Yeah, essentially. And that message came clearly from the community, and to a greater or lesser extent from other sources, from academia, from some of people like Sue Mason, some of my other colleagues who are sort of further up the food chain in this vertical whānau. This is one of the great things about being a Māori student at the med school, is that you have access to your tuakana when you're the teina, and then when you're the tuakana, you are looking after and supporting your teina, which is a magnificent passing on of that intel. Yeah. It was obvious to me that I had to be able to speak te reo. It's as simple as that.
How did, this is interesting for me, because a lot of people, it becomes obvious to them, and yet because they feel whatever it is within them, thinks, that's the challenge for me, and it's time, and I didn't have the basis, so therefore, I might not be very good at this. It appears to me that you took a strengths-based approach to this and said, this is just something I'm going to do, and I'm going to go away and do it, and I'll be sweet, and it'll all be good, and this will help, and all that kind of thing. Was there ever a time where you thought, I don't know, I don't know?
There was not a time where I thought, I don't know, but there were definitely times when I thought, this is really hard, and I'm really bad at this.
Really?
Oh,
I'm only laughing because I listen now. We were talking for about half an hour before this. Totally in the reo Māori, you were trying to tell me to speak in English.
Oh, look, I've made some absolute clangers with, of course, when you have these revered teachers, and I really want to talk about our teachers in te reo, right? You are one, of course, and our mumu reo, who are just such outstanding human beings. And I suppose I drew such resilience and resolve from watching them and watching people like, Suti Moti and Te Wharihuia and Po, them all. I don't, I'm going to miss out some names, so I just want to say all the teachers of the Kura Reo, all the teachers of Te Wānanga Aotearoa are so exceptional, give so much love to the students, and oh my God, can you imagine the things that they're hearing all the time? I
can, because I've said some of them in my own time.
Oh, look. So we're talking about Te Kura Taiaho before, and I'm like, he's one of those guys who's just like,
Yeah.
Is this person actually human?
Yeah.
And so you just want to impress the guy. And I remember saying to him, he tamariki koe? And immediately the words came out of my mouth. I was like, oh no, did I actually say that out loud? And I saw this little flash across his face. He's so kind. And he's like, he tamariki ai?
That's the one.
So, yeah, I know, I've blown it so many times. And I love the fact that people like Pāniu say, no mai te hapa. Well, just be careful what you wish for there. Because we've all shared a lot of hapa, haven't we?
That's right.
In our journey. And that was one of the things I realised I had to step over my own, getting overly involved in, I'm not good enough. That's a waste of energy. Like, just do it.
But how did you do that? Because that is... See, this is the thing, we've been talking a lot about, your career, and it appears to me it's the same, there's an inner resilience with you, and I'm wondering how that came about. Where does that come from? Because for a lot of people, in language journey, a lot of people will know this, they do the same thing, completely different reaction, withdraw, insular.
Yeah.
Where does that, call it inner strength or whatever it might be, where does that come from?
I think part of it comes just out of the ground, a deep sense of purpose, of one of the crazy ideas that I have is that, so I'm representing all of my ancestors on the planet right now. That's my job. So as that representative, I need to give it my best shot. Mm-hmm. So speaking to Reo, that's it. And I know that my reo ain't that great all the time, Ngāti Kurī, ia tahi wā. And I'm painfully aware of, some of the grammar things and the and the o and the ki and the e and all those things that just drive us all. And you just got to speak.
Yeah.
And people like Praone and the Taringa podcast, and these things are very helpful because they keep reminding us, and Māori, they keep reminding us, just speak it, And people might say, well, why aren't you speaking it now?
It's an obvious question that'll come up.
Yeah. Partly it's because I think I see the whakamā. I see the whakamā for so many of our whānau and so many of our whānau who are in mental health services and who are struggling with distress in the community. And I really want to encourage people to take up te reo as a rongoā, as a healing activity. And so I think sometimes when we're only speaking in te reo, people just zone out and they go, that's those other Māori, I'm not like them, I'm not good enough, I'm not entitled to be like that, and it's kind of written off. And I want to appeal to those people and say, look, I was there, I had nothing, I had kia ora, that was about it, and I probably said that wrong. Couldn't pronounce place names. I'd come from the UK, for goodness sake, right? And I suppose I've found those stories from people like yourself and Jeremy, all Te Kura Taiaho again, people who've learned it as a second language who are brilliant. You go, oh yeah, okay. There are some slings and arrows. There are some really hard moments, but you just got to keep going.
The irony of that story, of that kōrero, was, of course, what led you to go there in the first place, which was that it was going to help you in terms of what you wanted to do with your career, dealing with whānau. And you're right, there are also negative impacts of the strength that you have in your knowledge of te reo now and your use of te reo now, which can also be inhibiting for some whānau. It can be exclusive, it can be... a form of actually having a negative impact on them, right? Yes. So how do you manage that? Because it would come up on occasion, right? What process do you go through to know, right, okay, here's this whānau, this will help in this case, it won't help in other cases. What do you do that enables you to know that is the best thing to do?
So one of my key strategies is to wonder out loud about possibilities.
Okay.
So I like to put things on the table. I'm very straightforward with the whānau I work with. So I'll say, I can't help wondering if this might be a thing. Many whānau I work with don't have the reo, don't know whakapapa, don't know the marae. And I'm wondering if that might be going on for you. Because a lot of our people, right, this is what happens with colonisation. We learn to hate ourselves. This is the brilliance of colonisation. The colonisers don't have to do it anymore because we're doing it to ourselves. And so I try to normalise this for my patients, for my whānau. I'm one of those doctors who I'm not afraid to use the word patient, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I just can't bear the idea of calling the people I work with consumers. But that's another kaupapa.
Yeah.
So I will kind of put those cards on the table. And, you know, people just relax and they go, oh, I'm so glad you said that. Or, you know, yeah, because I'm a bit of a plastic Maori.
This is what they say.
Yeah. And I'll be like, oh, well, you know, look, if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And for particularly, I'm thinking some of the young people I deal with in relation to the courts and the kōti rangatahi, that they're coming with so much whakamā and shame and you know, heaviness. And you put that stuff on the table and they just, they just sit up.
Yeah.
They just sit up and they go, oh, miss.
Oh, miss.
Oh, miss. I'm like, kia ora. Oh, miss. Oh, no, that's cool, miss. Yeah, because, you know, that's been, you know, and people have been bullied. People have been made to feel like nothing. Like they can't even be Māori. And so I say, well, if that's the starting point, that's the starting point. Let's start from there. Are you interested? What might it feel like? Have you ever wondered about that? Should we do a karakia? Actually, I'm quite forceful with the karakia. I always offer karakia at the beginning and end of my sessions with people. And I kind of don't even really ask. I just say, I'll do a karakia for us, eh? And I can't think of anyone ever turning me down. I was racking my brains about this the other day. People are like, oh, yeah. Sometimes they're like, oh, where is this going? But I'm doing it for me as well.
Yeah.
And so I'm role modelling. That's another strategy, to just normalise it.
Okay.
It's not some sort of thing in a museum. It's not some sort of archaic, ancient thing that just has dust on it. And it's a living thing. And so I'm trying to bring it alive for people who have not had that experience.
So I think that's really important because, you know, there are the ability for those in health, particularly, you know, doctors, GPs, right? Yeah. Lots of organisations, GP practices become sausage factories. Yes. Time is not...
Yep. Next
15 minutes out, right? Yep. No time for karakia, got to get in there. Got a cold? Sweet, here's a pill, go. So what do we do? What do we do to be able to, this is a really kind of pitiful way of putting this, but build in time, build in our ability to be able to bring those things that are so important to us that you've talked about. How do we change that? Because I find it really difficult to think about how we can when we've got these practices that are just so concerned, you know, with funding and everything else to stay alive, so that they can offer services, but time is of the essence. Got to get people in and out.
So there's some more radical approaches to that, and some maybe more feasible approaches in the short term. I mean, in the longer term, I think we need to stop colluding with services that do not practice the process of healing and providing health services to Māori in a non-culturally safe way.
Wow, yeah.
So let's just stop doing that. Let's have Māori services being delivered in ways that work for Māori. By Māori, for Māori. Simple. So there's always time for karakia. I mean, karakia can be quite short and to the point, you know, up to heaven and back. Okay, let's go. We can be very pragmatic people. So I can see, and in some parts of the country and with some iwi and some hapu, and that would be pretty doable. And actually that is happening already. Then in other settings, it's a bit more tricky, and individual doctors are trying their best to push back those walls and say, no, this is the way I'm going to use that time, and I am going to do a karakia. Because if I don't do a karakia, the quality of the interaction is very poor. And that's what I see. So I did a little bit of research a long time ago, which found that if we don't do the cultural part right first, we never get to the clinical part.
Right.
So in fact, you could argue that there's a whole lot of wasted 15-minute sessions because none of those doctors are ever actually getting to the key, what you could call clinical issues.
Oh, I think that's right.
Because they never did the cultural surrounds, the korowai that is going to enable our whānau to really speak about what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're going to get some superficial kōrero like they did last time, which is about, oh, you know, my moko's got a cold. Whereas what they actually want to talk about is something much more fundamental.
And I think that is really important because when we talk about the fundamentals, when you're dealing with issues of intergenerational trauma, it takes a lot. It must take time for you to try and get into the real issues, not the presenting issues, the real issues that have affected that person in that way that have led them to get to the presenting issues that they've had, right? And that must be a really crucial factor for you about building in that time to be able to have those conversations. How do you do that? Like, how do you ensure that happens in a real meaningful way so that you can get to the real crux of what needs to be done?
Well, there are some basics like offering karakia, like being prepared, making sure that I'm in the right space for that, and building trust and taking time. So we know that when you make time for our whānau, and you know, it raises an interesting question in my mind about evidence, right? So one of the things that I've tried to do at every point where I can seize an opportunity to publish something that shows in the Western world, in the Western scientific world, this is an evidence-based practice. So we've published a paper about making time is very important for working with whānau. So you've got to be able to take your time, and whatever time it takes is the time it takes. And in mental health, I think we have some wriggle room to do that. Being consistently available. And sometimes there's a downside to that. So I do get contacted a lot at any hour of the day or night by people I don't know who, for whatever reason, trust me that I will provide something that is useful for them. So mostly I'm directing people to somewhere that they are likely to find some kind of professional, some kind of comfort, somebody who's actually going to take time and listen to them. Because let's face it, it's incredibly difficult to navigate the mental health system. And I'm inside it, so I can say that. So coming back to your original question, how do I actually do that? There's a whole range of ways. And I suppose at the heart of it, it's about trying to understand what it would take for that whānau to trust me. And sometimes I just ask them. Because trust issues are ubiquitous, like you said before. Most people do not want to tell the deepest, darkest, most painful, frightening thoughts that they have to anyone, let alone a psychiatrist. You know, I mean, I will sometimes joke, and it's a bit of black humor, if you don't mind the pun, a dark humor, maybe I should say. I'm the least favorite specialist. You know, if somebody has got to the point where they're seeing a psychiatrist, they're so desperate. You know, any parent of any child, you say, well, would you rather, you know, go to the respiratory physician, the cardiologist, the psychiatrist? I mean, they're going to run from the psychiatrist, right? Nobody wants to take their kid to see a psychiatrist. So by the time they do get to me, they are so vulnerable. So they're vulnerable, and yet why should they actually trust me? They've probably been around a whole lot of other people. Maybe the parents have been made to feel like terrible parents. They're expecting to be judged. They're expecting to have a horrible experience. And so a big part of my job is to help them to put that to one side, to put all those layers to one side, and to then start to get into what are the issues here. And you're safe here.
Wow. Is it So given that point, that literally in a lot of cases you are the last resort.
Yeah.
Right? So is it important therefore that we need more of you?
Yes.
Because you're the only one, right? But given you are the last resort, that's the obvious question. Should there be more of you? And how much more of you should there be? How many more of you should there be? How many more Māori child and adolescent psychiatrists should we have? Because it appears to me there should be more, because we have so many intergenerational trauma issues, traumatic events that have happened with our whānau, that we need them. And how do we do that?
I pose it in a different way.
Okay, all right.
I would like to see myself done out of a job. I would like to see prevention as the focus.
All right.
So yes, you will always need a few people at the extreme end, and people like me, that's where we are. And also, I need to have enough time and space in my day to help the people who are thinking about prevention be really practical, because I know what happens down there. It's like when I have been involved at different times in what was called infant mental health, which is a whole other gnarly, complex issue with language that is unhelpful around it. But as a youth forensic psychiatrist, I thought it was a really good thing for me to be doing, because at one end of the spectrum I'm seeing a history of difficulty that if we had supported whānau much, much earlier, it would never get to the court.
Right, okay.
So my circuitous way of answering your question is, let's not necessarily focus on making more Māori child psychiatrists. Let's focus on investing in the things that prevent the need for more Māori child psychiatrists. Things like ending poverty. You know, if you really want to do something significant to get rid of the vast bulk of pain and suffering and distress for our tamariki mokopuna and their whānau, then you'll end poverty. You'll sort out housing, you'll sort out nutrition, you'll make sure that our school system is not racist, you'll make sure that our whānau are economically standing in their rangatiratanga and connected as Māori and have access to things like wakaama, kapahaka, karakia, all of those things. Going home, knowing our pepeha, standing on our mountain, being in our river, going fishing, just like they did mai rano. Though all of those activities are mental health activities. What I do is about mental illness. We call it mental health services, which is very confusing and not true. So I'm interested in investing in those sorts of things, because I'd rather not need to have to do what I do.
Yeah, I completely understand, and you're right. You know, I've seen this a lot with Maya's work, right? Is that if you had the time, had the ability, that you actually wouldn't have to have things progress to a point where people like you in the role that you are required. A part of me thinks, though, that these are really long. No, let me put it this way, that's not the right thing to say. It's actually that we've got to do a lot of work, and I wonder if that can be done quickly, efficiently, effectively. And so do we tool up there, or where do we spend the best amount of resource? And unfortunately, this is a resource allocation issue, right? Your resource is finite. So is it better to focus on that now? Is it better to focus on where the level that you're at now? Or, you know, I know it's a very complex question, but it seems like we've taken so long to get to where we are now that it's going to take a long time just to get back to start line, you know?
I think there've been some really important new lines in the sand recently. So the Waitangi Tribunal report, the Hauora report, has been extremely helpful. Yeah. It's been very clear that the Crown has not delivered on its accountabilities around primary mental health. That's what that report was about. And we can extrapolate from that.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is a very, very helpful document. Yes, you're right. We could be taking a multi-pronged approach, and arguably that's more or less what's happening. It takes a long time to train a specialist, 13 years. And believe me, I'm putting it out there and trying to recruit as many Māori students and registrars into psychiatry and into child and adolescent psychiatry, because I think it's a really natural fit for our Māori trainees. That's one part of the work. I think if we look at the evidence, the public health evidence, it's very clear that if we want to effect change at a mass level, we need to do things about poverty and housing and diet and exercise and education. You know, education is a health issue. We've got really good evidence that our kids, our Māori kids, face different kinds of scrutiny, different expectations from teachers in general. So we know that, you know, our kids are more likely to be thought of as good for more menial kinds of jobs, not professional jobs, and that our kids pick that up. So they internalise those expectations, and though for many of them, they make their dreams smaller. Education is a health issue. The more education you get, the longer you live, the better your health, the better your economic status. So making sure that our tamariki mokopuna get the best in terms of their educational experience, their experience of their potential, of their brilliance, is so critical. One of the things that gives me such joy is that I get to work with the whānau at Hoani Waititi, Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Hoani Waititi. And that is just a shining example of this. You know, the blood, sweat and tears that's gone into establishing that place.
That's right, yeah.
You know, I mean,
yeah.
It's epic. I'm sure there could be several movies made about that, all starring Cliff Curtis. And yet there is such exquisite determination and vision that remains. And so at Brain Research New Zealand, one of the things I wanted to do with our neuroscientists was get them up close and personal with real Māori structures and entities in the community. And so of course I thought of Hoani Waititi. Yeah. And so for the last 4 years, I've been the matchmaker between the neuroscientists and the school and the kura. And it's really, it's just been such a joy to be part of it. So I've seen these tamariki mokopuna and their whānau and how fully Māori they are. You know, they just
I like
take
that term,
up
how fully Māori they are.
They're
It's
fully
true, it's
expressing
true,
their Māori identity.
Yeah.
And so that to me is, if we're looking at health indices around where you really want to invest, let's invest in more of that. If every Māori child in New Zealand was fully expressing their Māoriness, then you would have very little need for specialists like me. And that would be a great legacy.
Wow.
I'd be super happy with that.
Yeah. You've explained that in a way. I love that. I love that. Being fully Māori. I love it. It's a great strategy. You talked about your mum at the beginning of this. That's your own personal traumatic event, right? Mm-hmm. You've also had some events that have happened in your own family. I'm not going to get definitive about the kids, right? But I wonder if that where you've ended up and what you're doing now, how important that's been in also helping yourself in your own whānau, yes. Right? And whether or not actually, this could be tupuna talking here, right? About that, yes, you've ended up where you've ended up because there have been times where your expertise, your knowledge, who you are, has been important for you and your own. How differently do you approach situations when it comes to your own? From other whānau, or is it exactly the same process that you go through? Knowing, obviously, that it is so close to you, that it is potentially, very much more emotional for you to be able to have to go through that.
It's really tough because as a health professional living with addiction in the whānau, first and foremost, I'm the mother. And as a health professional, part of the guilt process is around, why didn't I see this earlier? I should know better. Why didn't I recognize this and do something constructive about it to prevent it? Surely I should have been able to do that. I mean, this is the sort of narcissism, I suppose, as a parent who's also a health professional that you can get trapped in. And pretty quickly I realized that wasn't going anywhere, and that was me getting consumed about my own inadequacy, which was actually not helping my whānau at all. So it's a double-edged sword, and I've seen it with other whānau, with other health professionals who've dealt with not exactly the same maybe, but similar situations. So, and what I've learnt is it's been incredible in that people now open up to me because they know that about me, and so they are sharing with me on a whole nother level, which is good, because we can already get rid of all those extraneous layers which are not helpful and get into the nitty gritty.
But you don't find that difficult? You don't find that?
No.
No?
I
Wow.
don't. Because again, I'm there with the purpose to serve this other whānau. It's not about me, it's about them. Sure. But if they see that I have some stuff, I have some lived experience that means that they can relate to me, they don't have to explain a whole lot of stuff in a way that they would do, or they think they might have to with somebody who hasn't had that experience, then we can sort of cut to the chase. It's horrifying when your own child is going through addiction. There's no other way to describe it. Mm. It's like a slow, painful death. Mm. And then, you know, we've been lucky. We've come out the other side. Our girl is really, really well, and she's flourishing. And so, and what is even more extraordinary is she's using her experiences to help others.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm so incredibly proud, and the whole whānau is proud, you know, and her brother's a big part of that. We're all part of that. Hawhai. Before we finish, you talked about the things that you do to prepare yourself, right? Indeed.
You know, wakaama and reo and karakia and everything else, going to the taumata wānanga, free plug.
Oh, without doubt.
Not going to the whakatauki class, no. Anyway, that's good. Hey, but going to Antarctica is a little bit extreme.
I know, right? I do have that extreme part of my personality. So I'm so incredibly blessed. I'm going on this trip for 3 weeks to Antarctica. It's part of a global women in science leadership program called Homeward Bound. And the idea is that we need more women leading in science, and we need more women in science leading our thinking and our impactful activities around the climate emergency that we're in. So this is the 4th cohort. This is the 4th year that they've done this. There'll be 100 of us on a boat in the Antarctic, and we'll be going off on zodiacs and going onto the ice and walking around and doing projects and honing our own ideas and leadership skills, if you will, and our networking around the globe to come back with some really practical visions and plans for what we're going to do. So I'm going to come back a different woman to some degree or another, a better version of myself with some different ideas about the next chapter.
Wow. I want to thank you for talking to us. I think you're already an amazing version of yourself, just quietly. I think the journey that you've gone through in a whole different bunch of ways has been inspirational. I think it's invigorating, I think it's motivating, but I do think it's inspirational. I don't think that it's just me thinking that either, to be honest with you. I think people that will watch that will be really inspired by this conversation, less so by the questions asked, definitely so by the answers that you've given. And I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I wish you all the very best in your future. I know it's not an easy thing that you are doing, but I think there are things that happen because tupuna inspired, fully Māori, luck, fortune means that you're in the right place. Thank you so much for talking to Indigenous 100.